I'm Glenn Campbell with a very specific podcast episode for a very limited audience. I'm going to talk about a medical procedure that I went through about 6 months ago for the benefit of other patients who may go through this same procedure. The procedure is called a stem cell transplant or a bone marrow transplant. And I had it for a type of cancer called lymphoma, but you might be offered this treatment for various other blood cancers, perhaps for leukemia. A lot of things I can't tell you because I don't have the broad picture of how this treatment is used. I only know about my experience. I don't want to take the place of your doctor and nurse in explaining this to you, but they don't have the kind of time that I have, and they don't have the inside experience that I have. So I think it would be useful. I'm doing my civic duty here by recounting my experience. It took up several months of my life, and I think it's important to recount my experience for the benefit of other people who may go through this experience, so you have a better picture, a bigger picture of this, because you have my experience to rely on. So what is this procedure? I went through something called an autologous stem cell transplant, which is also known as a bone marrow transplant. And whenever you use the word transplant, it sounds like there's going to be a lot of cutting and poking and drilling involved. If you're going to have a heart transplant, they have to cut you open, take your heart out, and put somebody else's heart in. And that's not what a transplant is in this environment. This is a non-invasive procedure. They're hardly ever going to poke you. The only times they're going to poke you is they're going to stick a tube in your chest that leads into your heart. And they may do a bone marrow biopsy where they drill into your bones to pull out a little sample. And there may be a spinal tap involved. But these are all very brief procedures. In my experience, they're not painful procedures. And the actual transplant part takes place only through an intravenous tube. So it's no different. This transplant procedure is really no different than getting a blood transfusion. They drip something they take stuff out of your blood and they put stuff into your blood, but there's no actual transplantation of bone marrow. And I think that's why they call it a stem cell transplant now instead of a bone marrow transplant, because people get all scared by the term bone marrow transplant. They're not transplanting your bone marrow for the most part. This is all going through the blood. So let me back up. I'm going to spend a lot of time on this. This is totally unscripted. I'm working from memory. I haven't done any new research at all, other than the research I've done when my case was pending. So the important thing is that you have to take everything I say with a grain of salt, because when it comes down to the details, I could be wrong. Procedures could have changed by the time you have the procedure. I could have made mistakes because of bad memory. And that's why it's very important, if you're going to listen to this and you're going to go through the procedure yourself, it's very important that you go to the description in the YouTube version of this podcast, because in that place, I can make annotations. I can say that at the 10-minute point, I made a mistake, and I can correct that mistake in that YouTube description. So it's very important to my peace of mind that you go and you look at that YouTube description, because I'll try to keep that up. Once I record a podcast, it's recorded, but I can change the description. I can change my annotations in the YouTube version of this. I don't want to be seen as offering you any kind of medical advice because that's what your doctor is for. But you know your doctor has only 10 or 15 minutes for you, and your nurse might have a little bit more time. But neither of those people has actually been through the procedure themselves, so they might emphasize different kinds of things than what I will emphasize. So first of all, I want to start with the basics. What is cancer? And cancer is really very simple. You know, you hear of all these different kinds of cancer, lung cancer and skin cancer and one cancer or another. They all have one thing in common. Every cancer is a failure, is a cell refusing to stop dividing. So in other words, cells naturally divide. That's how cells grow. One cell divides into two cells, divides into 4 cells. That's how a body grows. But every cell has to know when to stop. And there's some sort of signaling mechanism that tells a cell when to stop dividing. And when that signaling system is broken in some way, then the cell just keeps dividing and dividing and dividing, and it forms a tumor, and it takes over your body, and it kills you. That's what cancer is. So all the different kinds of cancer really aren't important in the essential concept. It's just a cell dividing without permission. And the aim of cancer therapy is, well, there's 2 ways to treat cancer. One way is to cut it out. You've got a tumor, you can go in there and cut it out and hope you've got it all. That's what you call a hard cancer, a definable tumor that you can do something with. My kind of cancer would be called a soft cancer. It's not in one location. It's all over the body, and that's the nature of blood cancers. Blood cancers are a certain type of blood cell starting to divide without permission. And in my case, my kind of cancer was called lymphoma. That's only because it tends to collect in the lymph nodes. It's really a cancer of the blood. And what has happened in my case is a certain kind of cell, normal blood cell called a B cell, a kind of immune cell, has started dividing without permission. And the aim of cancer therapy for all these soft cancers is simply to kill everything in your body that divides. Okay, a cancer cell by definition is dividing without permission. So many forms of cancer treatment are simply trying to stop all cell division in your body. And you may ask, where am I? I am in near the beach and near the airport in Key West, Florida, sitting in a rental car in a parking lot here, not far from the airport. So there may occasionally be some aircraft sounds in the background. So where was I? So the aim of cancer therapy is for these soft cancers is to stop cell division. Ideally, you just want to stop the division of the cancer cells themselves, but that's difficult. You have to really target these specific kinds of cancer. And what the more likely strategy is to stop all cell division in the body. And you do this essentially by dumping poison into the body that stops cell division. And you may think, well, this is going to kill you. If your body's cells can't divide, aren't you just going to die? And the remarkable thing is, no, you don't die, because a large number of the cells in your body do not divide. As I see it, there's 2 kinds of cells in the body. There are the cells that have to divide to keep you alive, and that's like blood cells and skin cells, which are constantly refreshing. And then there's the other cells that don't divide. Once you reach a certain age of adulthood, these cells don't divide anymore. They don't grow anymore. And those cells include brain cells and bone cells and heart cells and muscle cells. All of these kinds of cells don't divide. So it's very unusual for there to be any cancer in those cells to begin with because they never divide anyway. Once your bones get to be a certain length at a certain age in your adolescence, they don't grow anymore. Cell division just turns off. And the same thing applies to your brain. I think in your early 20s, you no longer produce new brain cells anymore. It's just the brain cells you have. So it's remarkable that they can stop all cell division in your body, and your body is doing okay. It's still able to function. Your brain is still able to function because your brain doesn't need cell division. And your heart is still able to pump because you never get any new heart cells anyway. So that's the remarkable thing. Now, the big danger here is that in stopping all cell division, you're also stopping the various components of your immune system, which are these white blood cells and platelets and things that attack invading organisms. Those things are killed because those divide and they refresh every few days. You get a new set of blood cells. And if you go through a chemotherapy program, chemotherapy is designed to stop that cell division. And so you're not producing blood cells anymore, and you can be very vulnerable. That's when they have to give you blood transfusions and do various things to get your white blood cells going again. So a lot of cancer therapy has gotten more targeted over the years. And the aim is to just stop the cancer from dividing and not stopping all the cells from dividing. But to a large extent, you're still doing this full frontal assault thing where you're just stopping everything. And you're stopping all forms of cell division and hoping that kills the cancer. And there's a good chance it will kill the cancer because the cancer, by definition, is dividing wildly. It's soaking up resources and dividing wildly. So any treatment that can stop all forms of cell division has a good chance of addressing the cancer. At least it will address it in the short term. Now, the reason you might need a stem cell transplant is that because traditional cancer treatment, traditional chemotherapy hasn't worked. And these cancer cells are still dividing. So the idea, at least in my case, was let's really let it rip and give you the maximum dose of chemotherapy, the scorched earth dose of chemotherapy that just wipes out everything that moves. And in this process, it wipes out your very sensitive bone marrow. It kills your bone marrow. It's like this heavy-duty poison that they put in your body that kills not only the cancer, but it kills your ability to generate new blood cells because it gets right down into your bone marrow and wipes out your bone marrow. So the transplant part of this process is when they give they wipe everything out, and then they give your bone marrow, they give you some bone marrow back to repopulate. They give you a certain kind of cell called a stem cell back to you so you can repopulate your bone marrow after they did this scorched earth kind of cancer treatment. So what the process consists of, first of all, let me talk about what standard chemotherapy is. Standard chemotherapy operates in these cycles where they dump a lot of chemicals into you to stop cell division and by various techniques. They stop cell division. You take in the chemicals, they knock you down, you become very vulnerable because they've wiped out a lot of your immune system, they've disabled your immune system. You're at a low point where you're said to be neutropenic, meaning you're very vulnerable to infection. And they let you recover. So a typical cancer treatment regimen, a chemotherapy regimen, lasts about 4 weeks. And what they do is in the first few days, they hit you with this chemotherapy, this poison, to stop your cell division. And then they let you recover. And just at the point where your blood cells are coming back, they hit you again with the poison. And each of these 4-week periods is called a cycle. And normal chemotherapy will go through a half dozen cycles. We'll go through at least 4 cycles usually to try to kill the cancer by stopping all cell division. And there's all sorts of different cocktails and techniques they can use to try to stop cell division. So they might try to stop cell division in one particular way with one cycle and then do a different way with another cycle. And there's all these chemotherapy drugs that they use because they stop cell division in different ways. And when you hit the cancer with all these different, this arsenal, all these different techniques, hopefully it kills the cancer, it stops the cancer. And after 4 months of treatment, after between 4 and 8 of these cycles, hopefully your cancer is gone. And I went through that procedure in 2018. So I first learned that I had lymphoma in July of 2018. They took a few days to assess me. Then they sent me into this treatment, a very intense treatment. My cancer at this point was very advanced. There were tumors all over my body. Looking at the CAT scans of my body, the PET scans of my body, you could see cancer everywhere in my body from head to toe. And you would think that, oh, this is stage whatever cancer, stage 5 cancer, and then there's no way I'm going to live. But this being a blood cancer, it's only in certain areas of the body. It can be treated. You can't cut the cancer out because there's too many tumors, but you can treat it systemically. And in 2018, I went through this very intensive chemo regimen of 5 or 6 cycles of this very intense chemotherapy where they knock you down. And as soon as you recover, they knock you down again. And for most cases of this disease that I have, lymphoma, it works. I have a very stubborn form of lymphoma, double hit, a large B cell in lymphoma, and the double hit is the dangerous part. And my chemotherapy didn't work that first time. I mean, they will clear out. There's a very good high probability that the chemotherapy will work and that it will stop the visible cancer. The only question is, will it come back? And after I was treated in the second half of 2018, I went through the entire year of 2019 being cancer-free, and then in March of 2020, my cancer came back again. I have an account of my cancer, how I learned that my cancer came back in another podcast, which I will link to this, to the YouTube description. I actually have quite a few videos and podcasts about my cancer. You can find them all linked to the YouTube description here. So in March of 2020, my cancer returned. I returned to my old cancer ward. I was very happy to be there because all my friends are there. I'm happy to reconnect with the staff that I love so much in the hospital where I was. My hospital was Beth Israel Hospital in Boston, Mass. I knew my cancer ward very well. I was happy to see everybody. And my first bout with cancer in 2018 was quite a shock. 2020, it was a piece of cake. I knew the rounds. I knew the procedures. I knew what had to happen. And I took control of the situation. And really, I had a lot of fun. You don't find many cancer patients like that who say that cancer was fun. But especially in my second round of cancer, I had a blast. I enjoyed myself. I took advantage of this free vacation not a free vacation, but this forced vacation that I had. And I enjoyed the whole procedure. So I get into the hospital in late March, and they have to decide what to do with me. My symptoms were a lot of buildup of fluid around my heart. So there were stem cells, there were cancer cells dividing in the fluid around my heart. And that's the only place they could find cancer. Obviously, the chemo regimen that they used before in 2018 hadn't worked. So they're going to graduate to the next step, which is the stem cell transplant. And from a user's point of view, the patient's point of view, what this consists of is a period of preparation where they force your body to produce a lot of stem cells, which are the blood cells that in your bone marrow that generate, that branch off and become all the blood cells that we know, the red blood cells, the white blood cells, the platelets. These things are generated from cells, specialized cells called stem cells, which reside in your bone marrow. That's where blood cells are born. So the situation with a bone marrow transplant is traditional chemotherapy hasn't worked, so they're going to hit you with the industrial strength chemotherapy. That industrial strength chemo in the process of killing the cancer is also going to kill your bone marrow. So they have to give your stem cells from your bone marrow back to you. And these stem cells can come from two places. There's a autologous stem cell transplant where they harvest cells from your own body before the procedure, and then they freeze these cells, and then they give them back to you after they've done the scorched earth chemotherapy. The other type of stem cell transplant, which I did not have experience with, is called the allogenic stem cell transplant, where the stem cells come from some other person, like a relative. I don't have any direct experience with that, but I understand that the giving back of the stem cells is pretty much the same. So what they're doing in the main procedure of giving your stem cells back, well, first of all, they got to give you this especially high dose chemotherapy, which kills everything, and that takes a few days. And during that period where they've killed everything, you are especially vulnerable. You have no immune system. This chemotherapy totally wipes out your ability to respond to pathogens. It wipes out your immune system so that you can't respond to, if you get some little cut and some bacteria get in there, or some other infection, your body can't fight it because your immune system has been wiped out. So there's a period in there when you are a boy in a bubble. And what I had to do is go into a hospital room for the better part of a month, and I could never leave that hospital room. It actually turned out to be about 3 weeks when I was absolutely confined to my hospital room. And this is a special hospital room that's been thoroughly sanitized. It's got a special air filtration system where there's more pressure inside the room than outside the room, so you're pushing all the dust and particles out of the room. It's a positive pressure room. And you're trapped in this room for a minimum of 3 weeks. And you can't leave. Now, to me, that's heaven on earth, because as long as I have my computer, I'm as happy as a clam. I'd love to be able to be sequestered for 3 weeks. And I was in a wonderful room. Another nice part of the process is that you don't have to deal with a roommate. You get a room to yourself. And this is going to be in Beth Israel, it's a big room. It's got a big bathroom, a private shower. So it's a luxury hotel. It could be seen as a luxury hotel. There doesn't have to be a double door in the front. You might think that this is an airtight, this is supposed to be an airtight bubble that you're living in, but it's not a double door. It's just a regular door, and that's because the room is positively pressurized. So there's no more pressure in the room. If you open the door, the air rushes out. No air rushes in. And if you were to open the door for very long, a buzzer will go off at the nurse's station saying, we've lost pressure in this room. So for 3 weeks, in the core of the treatment, there's 3 weeks when I'm just trapped in this room. In my case, I had windows. I had windows out into the street, and I had windows out into the hallway, which gave me some view of the outside world. I also had a television, and in all of my months of cancer therapy in 2018 and 2020, I never turned this television on except by accident. When I rolled over on the controller, the television turned on, and I quickly turned it off because nothing's going to kill you faster than television. Cancer is bad, but television is worse, because if you turn on the television, you become a passive blob and no longer in control of your situation. And I noticed this when I'm walking down through the ward during lighter periods of cancer therapy. You look in the doors at cancer patients, and most of them are just sitting there and watching TV, waiting for fate to take its toll. And I refuse to do that. I'm one of the few patients who was working on my computer all the time and never, ever turns on the television. I think that somebody should do a study to see whether people who watch more television, whether the amount of television you watch in the hospital has any bearing on your outcome. And I'll bet you that the more TV that you watch while in the hospital, the better your likelihood of dying. So my style is to take control of this situation and have a program of activities for myself and not waste a single moment on this of my vacation. Very different from other cancer patients. Other cancer patients hate the hospital. They're just chomping at the bit. They want to get out of here. They say, Doc, when are you going to let me out? And my attitude is, please don't let me out. I'm having a wonderful time. I'm enjoying the experience. Don't take this away from me. And I do everything in my power to stay in the hospital where I'm nice and protected from all that nastiness in the outside world. So what the nastiness consisted of in 2020 in 2018 was just nonstop Trump. So one of the rules of my room is that I would allow no Trump to enter into my room. And I had a roommate at the time, and if he's watching TV and there's Trump on that TV, I made sure that my curtain was shut. So I had a no Trump policy in 2018. And in 2020, I was in the hospital in the early days of the pandemic lockdown. So, which is a very good time to have it, a good time to do it. I didn't have to go through any special lockdown procedures because I was already in lockdown as part of my cancer treatment plan. So where am I in the story? Okay, so let's go back and go step through the procedures for at least an autologous stem cell transplant, where they're taking cells from your body and then giving them back to you. So the first thing I did after March is go through a kind of light chemotherapy, which was not nearly as bad. It was only in cycles of about 14 days where they hit me with some chemical and then let me recover for 10 days. I went through several of these 14-day cycles. I'm still not entirely positive why they did this, since the plan all along was to go through the stem cell transplant that I knew about, but I also had to go through this kind of preliminary chemotherapy, a light form of chemotherapy. And my doctor explained it to me as kind of a stress test. They wanted to see how I would respond to this routine chemotherapy. And then before they hit me with the really strong stuff. In any case, for the for April and most of May, I went through this light form of chemotherapy, which compared to my heavy form of chemotherapy in 2018 was just a piece of cake. I was never very disabled by this. What happens during chemotherapy is that you get very weak. It can become difficult to walk. You get winded very easily because they kill your red blood cells. And I felt very little of that during this light phase of chemotherapy. It was really relatively easy. In fact, I was able to keep up a fairly normal work schedule. During these 14-day cycles, I would go into the hospital for 4 or 5 days while they administered the chemotherapy, and then I would be out of the hospital for about 10 days and could live a fairly normal life. So that went so well that they kind of accelerated the hardcore part of the program, which is the stem cell transplant. And the first part of the transplant is the harvesting phase, where they have to get the stem cells out of your body. And the way they do this is they give you this stimulation. They stimulate your bone marrow with a drug called Neupogen. Very expensive drug. I forget how much it costs. $3,000. I've got this written down, but it's a vastly expensive. Yes, $750 per shot for Neupogen. And it's a patented medicine that accelerates the generation of white blood cells, accelerates the activity of the bone marrow. And they do this to hypercharge the bone marrow to produce a lot of stem cells. And the stem cells go into your bloodstream and they pull them out of your bloodstream. So you go through a process called apheresis, where you sit in a chair for most of the day and they suck the blood out of your body, send it through a centrifuge, and try to retrieve all the stem cells. And they're supposed to obtain a certain number of stem cells, a certain volume of stem cells. And some people can do it in a single day. For me, it took about 3 days to suck all of the stem cells out of enough stem cells out of my body. Now, but to be able to do this, to be able to withdraw blood from your body and stick it back in your body, they stick a tube into your body, which I just think is a blast. What they'll do is they'll cut an incision in your neck, just below near your collarbone, and another incision in your chest, and they'll stick a tube in, and they'll thread the tube down into the artery, the vein. I forget. Veins come out, venous. So arteries take the blood out of the heart, and veins take the blood into the heart. So they're going to stick this tube into your vein, thread it out via your shoulders, thread it down into your chest, and you have this tube sticking out of your chest. And most people freak out about this procedure, about having a tube stuck in them. But not me. I love the procedure. And normally they give people a sedative. They give you a local anesthesia so you don't feel any direct pain in your skin. But they also give most people a sedative so they don't freak out. And I decline the sedative because I want to be there for the whole procedure. I want the play-by-play from the surgeon, and if I'm paying for this, I'm going to get the maximum entertainment out of it. So they have to stick a catheter into your body. In my earlier cancer, they stuck what's called a port into my body, which is a catheter, but it's a narrow gauge catheter. In my new procedure in 2018, they stuck a wide gauge catheter, a bigger tube into my body. I was awake for the procedure. I could see the tube getting stuck in the x-ray screen, and I could ask the doctor questions about it. And then I'm very proud to have this catheter sticking out of my body, and I'd show it to anybody who wants to see it. So for the duration of this transplant procedure, I have this tube sticking out of my chest, and that provides all the access they need to take blood out, to put medicines in, to put chemotherapy in, and to return my stem cells to me. So initially, the procedure this is done on an outpatient basis. I go into the apheresis unit. I sit in a comfortable chair for most of the day. They suck blood out of me. It goes through a machine, and then they return the blood to me, except for the component they want. And the component they want is called the stem cells, which have been forced into the bloodstream by this Neupogen treatment. And they look to me like blood. Stem cells look like blood. A big bag of blood that collects in the machine. And a courier comes and picks up the blood. They take it to the lab. They run some tests. Then they freeze it. And I say, you really got to be careful of that blood. To be really careful of those little sacks of stem cells, because my whole life depends on them. They're going to put it in a freezer. They're going to put it in a refrigerator. And I want to make damn sure that no one trips over the cord of that refrigerator, because I'm a dead duck if they do. And everyone assures me it's not going to happen. No one's going to trip over the cord. But so they take my stem cells. This is a couple weeks before the procedure. They take my stem cells from me. They run all sorts of tests. They do all sorts of cultures to make sure the stuff is good. And then they freeze the stem cells, and we're ready for the transplant itself. So for the transplant, I know that I'm going to be going into the hospital for a month. And I know that I'm going to be trapped in a hotel room for at least 3 or 4 weeks. So I had plenty of time. First of all, you need to get the right room. And, I know all the rooms. I've been in all the rooms on my ward. My ward is called Feldberg 7 at Beth Israel. I know all the rooms, and I know what room I want. So it's just a matter of buttering up the scheduling nurse, getting really friendly with the scheduling nurse, because your scheduling nurse controls the universe, decides who works when and who gets assigned to what room. So you really want to be on the good side of the scheduling nurse. And the scheduling nurse was really nice to me and gave me one of the 2 primo rooms in the whole ward. My first choice was a room that was right on a corner, was a corner office with glass walls on 2 sides and a big bathroom. And I thought that was just the greatest room. And I subtly requested that, not so subtly requested that of the resource nurse. But she gave me a different room next door, which was just as big, did not have as many windows, but had a much bigger bathroom. And I knew that I would this wasn't assigned until I actually turned up, but I knew I was going to get one of these 2 rooms with a big bathroom. So I did a lot of preparation beforehand. I thought, what am I going to need for these 2 months? For this 1 month, I'm going to be in the hospital. And I went out and I bought a bunch of supplies that I knew I would need. And these were creative supplies. And the most important thing that I went out and purchased was a swimming pool, because I knew I would have this big bathroom and I could set up a swimming pool in my bathroom. And I went looking specifically for swimming pools, and I found the ideal candidate. It was a children's blow-up, a wading pool that came in a fairly small box that I knew I could smuggle into the hospital, because I knew that the staff was not going to give me permission to have a swimming pool in my bathroom. So I had to outwit them. And this was rather difficult because the security is tight when you go into what I'm going into is a totally sterilized, sanitized hospital room that's been specially prepared for me. And anything that I bring in has to be vetted and wiped down by the nurse. So we have to go through an inventory procedure where I bring in my computer and all the supplies that I'm going to need, and we have to inventory them, and we have to wipe them, sterilize and sanitize them all before they can come into my room. So how am I going to smuggle in my swimming pool? And what I decided to do is I came with some luggage, and I left the swimming pool in my luggage, and I said, can you just hold my luggage for me? So my luggage was held outside of my room until my blood levels returned to a fairly safe level. So my swimming pool never actually got into my room during the sterilized portion, during the boy in a bubble phase of my treatment, but it was waiting for me when I was out of the woods. And I bought all sorts of other art supplies, knowing that I would need to entertain the staff. I decided, since I knew I would probably have a window into the hallway, that I would keep the staff entertained by putting signs in my window. So I bought a lot of signs from the dollar store and Walmart, signs like "Beware of Dog" and various things, all sorts of magic markers and boards and things that I could make signs out of. So I had my art supplies. I managed to bring those art supplies in with their knowledge, magic markers and things and signboards. I could bring that in, but I didn't dare try to smuggle my swimming pool in. So I come in for this procedure. I come with baggage, knowing that I'm going to be there for a month. We go through this inventory process with a nurse, and then I walk into this room and they close the door and I'm locked in for 3 weeks. Now, they can come and go. The staff can come and go. I can't come and go, but the staff obviously has to come and deal with me. And they come in full garb. They come in with masks and aprons and full suits, not quite hazmat suits, but this is the normal procedure. It's something we're quite used to in the era of COVID, but this is standard procedure when you're dealing with a patient in a stem cell room. You have to come in with a mask, but the staff can come and go, and so I do have this daily contact with my nurse and the other in my PCP, what used to be called an orderly, the person who takes care of my routine needs, and And so I did have a bit of a community there, a new nurse. I had, a special nurse that was assigned to me most of the time because I requested him. And this is a male nurse named Ross. And Ross is a great big bear of a man, a wonderful guy, and a great friend. And I'm really glad that I could get him for a lot of the time when I was in isolation. So I go in isolation, and at this point, I am 100% in perfect health. There's no sign whatsoever that I have cancer. In fact, there was no sign I had cancer since March. I had no outward symptoms. Once they drained the fluid out of my heart, I had 2.5 months. I had, 2 months of perfect outward health, where there's no sign that I have cancer. I'm robust. I can run a marathon if I want, in spite of the cancer, the chemotherapy they're giving me. I'm very robust and healthy when I go into this room, which is important to the doctors because if I'm robust going in, I'm more likely to be resilient to this treatment. So I walk into this room in perfect health. The first thing they do the first day is start hitting me with this powerful chemotherapy. And this takes about 5 days of very intense chemotherapy, dumping the strongest poison that I can manage into my system. And I felt great for those whole 5 days. I have a Fitbit, and every day I would walk 10,000 steps with my Fitbit inside my room. So my room was big enough that I could run laps within my room. What I would do is I would touch certain parts of the room. I would go through the room in the same sequence, touching various things in my room, going into the bathroom, touching various things, and I would get up to 10,000 steps every single day. And most of you probably never get 10,000 steps, even in the real world, but I did it while confined to a hospital room, and I'm very proud of that. So during those 5 days when they're hitting me with this powerful poison, I really don't feel too bad. And then we actually start the transplant itself. So presumably they've killed everything. I don't feel it. I feel fine. And then they give my stem cells back to me on what they call day 0. So someone goes to the fridge, gets these bags of stem cells, which look like blood, thaws them out. They give them back to me over the course of a couple hours. And I've got the stem cells now circulating in my bloodstream. And it turns out that they know where to go. They know what to do. They don't have to stick them in my bone marrow because these stem cells automatically migrate to the bone marrow where they can replicate and start producing. Somehow they know what to do. They know to start producing new blood cells. So all they got to do, really the whole transplant part of this thing is just taking these bags of blood, what looks like blood, sticking it back in my bloodstream, and that's the whole transplant. There's no sticking a needle in my bone marrow or anything like that. You just stick all these cells back into my bloodstream. These cells know on their own where to go. They go to the bone marrow, and they take up residence there and start replicating and eventually start reproducing the blood cells I need to survive. And just about this time, at this day 0, is when I really started feeling like crap. And what crap means is just not having any energy, not having any enthusiasm to work on my computer, which is highly unusual, just wanting to sleep all day. I must say that I've never, in all my cancer experiences, I never really experienced any pain. Cancer was not painful to me. What I did experience is extreme fatigue. For example, not being able to walk more than 20 steps without sitting down. This is usually the result of having a very low red blood count, where you just don't have the ability to transport oxygen around. But there's always some ability to transport oxygen. So if your red blood cell levels get too low, they'll give you a transfusion of someone else's blood to bring it back up so it's not dangerous anymore. And what this means is that throughout any time during cancer therapy in both years, no matter how bad things got, I was still fine, just fine when sitting in bed, not exerting myself. I was still completely alert and could work on my computer just like normal. The exception was this period starting right around the time of my transplant. For about a week, I really wasn't good for anything. I could only sleep. I got maybe 4 hours of computer work in for the whole day. The rest of the time was just sleeping. I feel terribly guilty and unproductive about that, but it wasn't too bad. About a week of really being down in the dumps. And all they're doing is they're shooting me up with this Neupogen again, this stuff that's designed to stimulate white blood cell growth, and waiting for my blood to come back. So they're testing my blood every day for various counts, for the white blood cell count, the red blood cells, the platelets. They're measuring this. And when these blood cells get back to a normal level, that's the indication that I'm okay. And when they get up to a certain level, then I'm allowed out of my room. So how this worked is that for 5 days I was poisoned. For about a week after that, I was incapacitated. And for a little bit more than a week, I was gradually getting better and better, and my blood cells were coming back. And eventually my blood cells got to a certain level where they let me out into the hall again. And I could burst forth from my room and wander the halls again, which meant just I could walk a circuit around the halls in the ward. And this was the indication that the worst of it is over. And a few more days in the hospital, another week in the hospital, and I'm ready to go home. I'm ready to leave, and I'm used to this. When I first left the hospital, I was extremely weak. Out in the real world, for the first couple of days out in the real world, I could barely move. I could barely move from my bed. And then I went for my first follow-up treatment, maybe 3 days after the hospital, and they found I was dehydrated. They gave me some fluids and I perked right up again. So this whole 3 days of being miserable was simply the fact that I didn't have any appetite and I wasn't drinking enough. I wasn't thirsty enough, wasn't drinking enough. So this treatment kills your appetite. It disrupts a lot of your systems. You lose your sense of taste. Completely lost my ability to taste any kind of subtle flavors. I could basically figure out sweet and salty, but all flavor for food was gone. That's the result of this poisoning, because the poisoning just kills your blood cells. It kills the cells in your tongue, for example, that taste things. Your cells in your nose that smell things. All of these things are cells that frequently divide. So this scorched earth chemotherapy kills all those cells. Destroys your sense of taste, and destroys a lot of your, normal motivations like thirst. So it was a big challenge at first when first released to get enough food and drink into me, because I had no interest in food. You could put the the most wonderful chocolate cake in front of me, I would have no interest in it. And that took a little bit of time, but my body itself recovered almost once we got over that little dehydration phase, my body recovered really in a matter of days. I was back to doing almost normal stuff by within 2 weeks. I was almost back to all my normal activities, and within 3 months, absolutely 100% recovered, with no even lingering symptoms that I was ever in chemotherapy, which is different than my 2018 experience. After my heavy-duty cancer chemotherapy in 2018, which ended at the end of the year, I spent all of 2019 recovering and getting back to full capacity. After my 2020 stem cell transplant, I responded instantly, got back to full functioning in 2 weeks and full health in about 3 months. And right now, I'm healthier on the outside than I've ever been in my life. I go to a gym, I work out, I'm at the peak of fitness, and you never know I had cancer. Now, that's outward health. There could still be cancer cells floating around in my body, and this is the kind of cancer that could easily come back and probably will come back. But for the time being, I'm doing great. So 100% full recovery from a stem cell transplant is certainly possible. So let me go through some other general things that you might want to know if you're a patient considering this procedure. First of all, how much does it cost? And it's way more than you can afford. Maybe $250,000. I don't pay a lot of attention to the bills, but I did during my first stay in 2018, where I spent about $500,000 of my insurance company's money. The expense to me, however, was not devastating. There's a certain out-of-pocket maximum. I can't remember what it was, $7,000 or so. I put this in on a payment plan, so I'm still making payments on my credit card for this. But it's not onerous. Not $7,000. I think my out-of-pocket for the stem cell transplant was something like $5,000, which distributed over, they put me on a payment plan, $500 a month or so, $400 a month. It's not a high price to pay for staying alive. And if I had I'm in a very privileged situation where I don't have any dependents. I don't have, as a driver without a fixed residence. I don't have many expenses. That I made out financially pretty okay because I didn't have many expenses. I had a little bit of savings saved up the second time around, and having to pay $400 or $500 a month for the next 12 months, that's a small thing for having my life saved. And I fully realized that in any other earlier era in medical history, I'd be a dead duck back in 2018. And I'm very grateful for this extra time, and I don't mind being in hock for it. So in terms of the medical system in America, the system is screwed up in many different ways. But from my standpoint, it worked pretty well. It worked excellent. I got excellent care. It's very patient-centered care in America because hospitals are competing with each other. So whenever I needed a test, I got it almost instantly. I rarely had to wait in a waiting room for more than 15 minutes ever. And the American system has its flaws, but in terms of what you experience, assuming that it all can be paid for, what the patient experiences is very high quality staff, high quality care, not any kind of delays or rationing as you might expect in a nationalized system. I don't want to defend the American system, but for me, in this instance, it worked out pretty well. What's the impact on your family? And I don't know that because I don't have a family. I mean, my relatives are all quite distant from me, and no one seemed particularly worried about me, which is great. I mean, I think that the worst part of dealing with cancer is dealing with your family. Because they're the ones that are going to be freaked out, especially if you're the breadwinner of the family. It's your family that's going to turn the experience into hell. It's not that the cancer experience itself is that bad. For me, the cancer experience never involved any pain. For me, once I got over. Once it became known that I was going to live, it wasn't an anxiety-producing experience. To me, the whole cancer experience was wonderful. What would make it hell for most people is that they have families and they have people who care about them. And it's hell on those people who are doing all this worrying. And I was in this very privileged situation where no one cares very much about me, which is great if you're going to go through cancer therapy. It means you don't have to worry about other people worrying. Now, in 2018, when I came into the hospital, if you walked down the halls and looked in other people's rooms, there were always relatives in other people's rooms. There were spouses and children who were all kind of hovered over the patient, worrying about the patient. So in any particular hospital room, there might be 5 or 6 people because there's 2 patients, but there's also all their relatives that are in there and kind of hovering around them. When I went into the hospital in 2020, there was none of that. There were no visitors because of COVID, which is it might be bad for the patients, but it's wonderful for the staff who doesn't have to deal with relatives anymore. And it just makes everything work so much better when you don't have these people hovering around, worrying and asking questions and making demands on behalf of their father or their spouse. So that's a case where COVID really made things work much more smoothly in the ward than they did before. The only real effects of COVID that I could see is that staff was wearing masks 100% of the time. Whereas before COVID, they would wear masks only in special situations. So what else would you need to know? Food. Food is great. Food is included. Food is all free. It's kind of like the Club Med program, where you pay one fixed fee and you can eat as much as you want. And there's a pretty good menu. And if you're a frequent flyer like I had been in the hospital long enough that they elevated me to this super secret gold status where I got access to a different menu. I had got access to what's called the Cafeteria Menu, where you could have a special selection every day of what they're serving to the staff in the cafeteria, Monday through Friday. So you can eat all you want. You just order room service. There's a standard menu. You call them up, and 30 minutes later, the food arrives. The food's going to be cold by then, but eventually you learn what's good and what isn't, and then you have this special menu to work from. The only trouble is during many phases of cancer treatment, you just don't want to eat. So it's this conundrum where you get all you can eat, all you want, but you don't want to eat. And a challenge during a lot of cancer therapy is how to force yourself to eat because you're going to lose weight. I knew this going in. I lost a lot of weight in 2018, and I knew that I was going in for a transplant in 2020, and I had 2 months to bulk up, to fatten myself up. And I took those 2 months to really engorge myself so I would have extra body weight that I could lose it. And it turns out my stem cell transplant did not decrease my weight very much. So now I'm coming out of the stem cell transplant, instead of being emaciated like I was previously, I was actually kind of chunky. I was up to 200 pounds. So I had to work that back down over the course of the rest of 2020 and get back to a normal weight of about 180 pounds. It turns out that was pretty easy because, as I mentioned, the stem cell transplant, or the chemotherapy that preceded it, wiped out my taste buds, wiped out my sense of taste, and it's never fully returned. So I can taste everything that you can describe. I can taste. I can taste saltiness and sweetness, and I can recognize the tastes of food that I eat. But I've lost some of my oomph, a certain savory quality. So, a nice sizzling steak, I recognize that it's salty and it's kind of has a meat texture, but the real savoriness of that meat has been lost to me. Maybe it will come back or maybe not. But the huge advantage of this is that it's incredibly easy to lose weight. I have no great desire for food. I have no great desire to sit down in a fine restaurant because it would be lost on me. The experience would be lost on me because I've lost some of the subtleties of my taste. So I consider that a feature, not a bug. And I've embraced that as a reason to lose weight. I just don't eat, and it doesn't occur to me to eat. And if someone sticks a luscious coconut cream pie in front of me, I'll take a couple bites, and that's enough. So this is kind of a fringe benefit of having gone through this therapy, that I've lost my lust for food, and it's much easier to control my weight now. So what does aftercare consist of? So first of all, when they release you after my stem cell transplant or after any cancer treatment, they want to see you on a regular basis. And initially it might be 2 times a week, Tuesday and Friday or whatever, 2 days a week to just test your blood levels and monitor you. And that might go on for, a couple of weeks. Then they make it a week. And then they make it 2 weeks, and they stretch it out. And at this point, I go in every 2 months. Then I'll eventually stretch to 3 months, and eventually twice a year, and probably stop at that, where I'll have to see the cancer doctor once or twice a year for the rest of my life. And of course, I'm monitoring. Now that I know what the symptoms are of this disease, I'm constantly monitoring. And I've got a secret phone number I can call if any symptoms pop up. Any time of day or night, I can call this number and have someone paged to get in touch with me and to discuss my symptoms. So I have a team behind me, and if my cancer comes back, I know what to do. I'll go back and see my friends in Feldberg 7. And we'll go through a different form of chemotherapy. And I know what that form of therapy will probably be. It may be a CAR T cell therapy. But there's always more tools in the toolbox. Lymphoma and other blood cancers are likely to come back. There's just a high probability of that happening, as opposed to your hard cancers, like a lump in your esophagus or something, a big lump that can be identified. That's called a hard cancer. Very often the best option is just to cut the thing out and you're free. But with lymphoma and the soft cancers, they could come back again and again. And when they do come back, you hit them with another set of treatments. And maybe they work, maybe they don't. But all of this time, you're buying more time on planet Earth until, I hate to tell you this, but everybody dies. Sooner or later, everybody dies. And whether it's cancer that gets you or something else that gets you, you're gonna buy it sooner or later. In my likelihood, in my world, it's probably a little bit more likely that cancer is going to knock me out. But if cancer doesn't do it, something else will. So it's not a matter of being cured so much as a matter of just delaying the Grim Reaper a few years longer. So if my cancer comes back, I'm going to catch it at an very early stage because I'm always monitoring for the signs. And they're going to hit me with this new form of treatment. 2 years from now, cancer might come back, and maybe at that point they'll have a different form of treatment. So they can keep you going. They can keep you cranking as long as the medical system still functions and the insurance system still functions. They can do remarkable things in keeping you alive. And even if they don't cure the cancer, even if they say, okay, we can't do anything, all the treatments we've tried, they don't work. Well, then you're into something called salvage therapy, where they can still keep you alive. They know they're not going to cure the cancer, but they can still use various techniques to keep you alive and keep you kicking for a couple more years. So cancer isn't really a death sentence. At least this kind of cancer isn't necessarily a death sentence. And even if it is a death sentence, it could take you an awful long time to get there. So that's what I'm counting on. I'm not worried about my cancer at all, about the cancer coming back. I lead a healthy lifestyle. That's all I can do. I see my doctor. I take my meds. I monitor my situation and let them know of any irregularities. And that's all I can do. And I can just go on with my life. I actually think that cancer has done me an enormous service in getting me more focused on the things that I should be doing in life. Because prior to my cancer in 2018, I led a pretty happy-go-lucky life. I was living my life as though it were unlimited. And what cancer did is make me realize that I have a time limit. And my time limit is 2 years. That's my operating principle, that everything I need to accomplish in life has to be done in 2 years. And you cut out a lot of the bullshit that way. Before my cancer, I was a world traveler. I would bounce around all over the world to see new places. And I began to realize after my cancer that that's just not productive. I'm not getting anything done. I've already seen everything and done everything. And now is the time to get down to accomplishing the things I want to accomplish. And cancer really got me focused on this. What am I going to do to accomplish stuff within the next 2 years? Because 2 years from now, I could be gone. And if I'm not gone, well, I'll just renew that with another 2-year plan and keep going 2 years, 2 years, 2 years until my eventual demise. And I'm not living like, I do not live life as though this was my last day on Earth, but it's my last 2 years on Earth. So I've got to be productive about it and cut out the noise and cut out the things that I know I really don't need. And I'm grateful for cancer to do that, because if I had not had that wake-up call, I would be frittering away the rest of my days when I really should be focused on getting things done. So that's my review of what it's like to have an autologous stem cell transplant. I will provide lots of links in the YouTube description to all of my past posts and stuff about it, because I have produced a lot about my cancer, a lot of videos, podcasts, and Facebook notes of all kinds are found in this, will be linked to the YouTube thing. And as I think of more things that I should be tacking on to this little account, I will find a way to do it. So hopefully I've given you a good overview of what the procedure is like. And of course, you can use Mr. Google to find out more details. And if I need to add anything more, I'm going to add it to the YouTube description.